The morning after the hurricane, I stood at the edge of my front porch, boots caked in mud. The scent of salt and splintered pine heavy in the air. The storm had gutted most of Haven Glen overnight. Roofs peeled away like paper lids, fences twisted like ribbon, and driveways were littered with shattered glass and children's toys half buried in muck. But my house hadn't lost a single shutter. I should have felt lucky, grateful even, but all I felt were eyes staring, judging. Neighbors walked the street, dazed, some crying, some calling out for pets. A few stopped and looked up at me. Really looked. Not with relief or camaraderie, but something colder, sharper. Suspicion. I knew then that survival, at least in Haven Glen, came with a price. The storm had been projected to veer off course. The HOA sent out an email 2 days prior reassuring everyone that there was no need for alarmist behavior or unsightly non-regulation storm preparation. That last line was directed at me. I'd started boarding up windows and reinforcing beams a week before the first warning dropped. I didn't trust forecasts. I trusted what I'd seen in Fallujah and what I'd lived through during Hurricane Drew back in '03 when I lost a cousin to floodwaters. So, I'd built my house different. Years ago, when I retired from the Army Corps of Engineers, I didn't just buy a house. I rebuilt it from the foundation up. Reinforced concrete slabs, storm anchors. I paid extra for flood-proofed insulation. I fought with the HOA every step of the way. They hated that I didn't use their approved contractors. They hated that my shutters weren't the soft beige every other house wore like a uniform. They hated that I didn't care, but my house stood, theirs didn't. As I walked down the drive that morning, I passed Mrs. Langston. Her roof had collapsed inward, destroying half her kitchen. Her eyes locked with mine and she muttered, "Figures, your place is fine." I stopped. "You okay?" I offered. "Need anything?" She turned away. "We all need something, don't we?" By noon, the HOA set up folding tables in the middle of the cul-de-sac. Bryce Donnelly, the president, looked like a drowned ferret. His khakis were soaked and stained, his golf visor cocked sideways, but his voice still carried that smug-clipped authority I'd come to despise. "We're compiling damages for a comprehensive community insurance claim," he announced, bullhorn in hand. "Our assessment will cover all homes within the Haven Glen jurisdiction." Someone asked about deductibles. Another asked about timing. I just listened. Then Bryce's eyes scanned the crowd and landed on me. "We'll also be including anomalies," he said pointedly, "such as properties that somehow resisted damage. Our legal team believes it may benefit the neighborhood's overall case." That night I got the first email. It was from the HOA's legal liaison. They were demanding consent to include my home in the $10 million insurance claim. The wording was slick. For the good of the community, in solidarity, homeowners are expected to participate fully. I didn't reply. Instead, I went out back and checked my storm panels again. Every bolt was still tight. Not a scratch on the siding. I'd followed every regulation that mattered. Building code, fire safety ordinances, FEMA recommendations. What I hadn't followed was HOA aesthetics. They'd fined me 3 times over the years. Once for the color of my garage door, once for planting native grasses instead of the standard turf, and once, laughably, for unapproved sandbag placement during the last flood advisory. But now they wanted me to pretend I was damaged, to act like I was a victim, so the claim would look stronger. By morning, flyers were taped to every door. Mandatory town meeting, damage assessment, and unified claim strategy. It sounded like strategy, all right, not one that stank. I arrived late on purpose. The moment I walked in, the air shifted. Heads turned. Whispers passed. Bryce stood front and center with a massive diagram of neighborhood homes marked with red X's and orange partial loss stickers. Mine was the lone green square in the corner. And here's Mr. Sanderson," he said, voice dripping with sarcasm. "The man who defied every HOA improvement regulation for a decade and now has a perfectly intact home." The room chuckled bitterly. "I followed the law," I said. "Just not your cosmetic nonsense," Bryce smiled. "Then perhaps you'll be proud to contribute more. Since your home is fully intact, we believe it would be reasonable for you to shoulder a greater portion of the legal filing fees." "You want me to pay?" "Because I didn't suffer loss?" "Exactly. The claim looks stronger when we show community-wide devastation. Any deviation weakens our argument," I laughed. "This isn't a neighborhood. It's a protection racket," gasps. A murmur of outrage. Bryce raised his hand. If you refuse to comply, we may have to review your past violations. Our lawyers will be combing through records. And there it was, the first threat. That night I locked every window, not because of the weather, because of my neighbors. Tarps pulled last minute. Fences half-heartedly braced. Generators wheeled out, some still in boxes. Panic was setting in. Meanwhile, I sat in my kitchen and monitored the storm path. Every window locked and reinforced. My power bank full. My pantry stocked. My radios charged. I didn't gloat. I wasn't proud that I was ready while they weren't. I had offered to help and they'd spit in my face. I just wanted to survive. When the winds came, I barely slept. Not from fear, but because the sound outside was unlike anything I'd heard since combat. Trees snapping, metal groaning. Somewhere in the distance, a roof peeled away like foil. I thought about Paula, about the kids on Pine Ridge Drive. I worried for them even as they'd mocked me. By morning, I knew the storm hadn't just exposed weaknesses in wood and concrete. It had exposed everything broken underneath this neighborhood, and now they wanted me to pay for it. 2 days after the storm, the insurance adjuster still hadn't shown up, but the HOA already had a plan. Bryce and the rest of the board weren't mourning losses or helping elderly residents sift through wreckage. No, they were standing in front of the HOA office trailer, setting up easels and posters like it was a product launch. A banner flapped above the pop-up tent they pitched near the clubhouse rubble. Haven Glen Recovery Plan. Stronger together. I stood back with crossed arms as neighbors trickled in, most still too shell-shocked to read fine print. Bryce wore a fresh polo now, white with the Haven Glen logo stitched on the chest, and a pair of aviator sunglasses like this was just another day at the club. Beside him, Danielle Rowe, the treasurer, held a clipboard and a thick stack of forms. Bryce clapped his hands. Thank you for coming. I know we've all suffered tremendous loss, some more visible than others, he said, shooting a glance at me. But we have an opportunity now. An opportunity to rebuild better, smarter, safer. And to do that, we need to stand together. I felt my stomach twist at that word. Together. We've partnered with legal experts and a top-tier disaster claims consultant, he continued. They've advised us to file a unified claim. One voice. One number. $10 million, a few murmured. A man raised his hand. That seems steep. Danielle stepped forward, professional and bright. That figure represents not just structural losses but emotional trauma, displacement costs, and the time it will take to restore our community standard. If we show unity, we strengthen our case with the city and insurers. Someone asked, will it cover temporary housing? Yes, Danielle said, but only if we all commit. All homeowners must sign the affidavit of loss and the joint settlement authorization. That includes those whose homes were less visibly impacted. There it was again. Less visibly. I stepped forward. My home wasn't less visibly impacted. It wasn't impacted at all. I don't qualify for that claim. I won't sign a false affidavit. Bryce pulled his sunglasses down just enough for me to see the contempt in his eyes. Mr. Sanderson, with respect, this isn't about just you. It's about our community's ability to recover. Your participation would be fraudulent, I cut in. You're asking me to say I suffered losses I didn't. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Bryce raised his hands in a show of diplomacy. Of course. No one is forcing anything. But the insurance group is more likely to approve full funding if we show a united front. Solidarity strengthens legitimacy. Individual refusals complicate things. He didn't have to say the quiet part out loud. That evening, a packet arrived on my doorstep. No note. Hand-delivered. Inside was the affidavit of loss with my name already filled in. The joint settlement authorization. The amount claimed, $10 million. A sticky note on the last page. Sign and return by Friday. Don't hold this up for everyone else. D.I. didn't sleep much. The next morning, I went to what was left of the HOA clubhouse. The storm had ripped the back wall clean off. Waterlogged documents sagged in filing cabinets. I wasn't there to gawk. I was looking for building permits. I knew they'd cut corners years ago, especially during the clubhouse upgrades. Gossip leaves paper trails. I dug through a drenched cardboard box and found what I needed. A red-stamped denial notice from 5 years ago, rejecting the exact roof modifications that had now collapsed in the storm. I scanned everything. When I got home, an email was waiting. Subject: Notice of non-cooperation in HOA enforcement review. It accused me of hindering community recovery. Threatened penalties. Cited a bylaw that didn't actually establish liability. Fear language. But fear doesn't work on everyone. That evening, I noticed my mailbox had been pried open, bent, empty. The post office had no record of interruption. Message received. The deadline came and went. I didn't sign. By afternoon, Bryce, Danielle, and another board member were at my door. Bryce handed me a certified letter. Formal notice of non-compliance. I held the envelope and stared him down. You wrote that bylaw last week, didn't you? Danielle stiffened. The board voted to amend the bylaws to reflect the current emergency. You're the board, I said. We represent the community, she snapped. And the community is moving forward. You're penalizing me for not pretending my house was destroyed, I said. Bryce sighed. Dramatic. We're asking for cooperation. You benefited from this community's standards for years. Like hell I did, I said. You fined me, harassed me, threatened to lien my property because I wouldn't use your cousin's contracting company. His jaw tightened. I'm not signing, I said. Insurance fraud won't get you $10 million. It'll get you 10 years. A quiet board member leaned forward. You think people here won't blame you when funding gets denied? Oh, I'm counting on it, I said. Because then they'll start asking why the HOA bet the whole recovery on a lie. And I'll be here with documents. Bryce's face went cold. Then consider this your final warning. I've been isolated since the day I moved in, I said, and closed the door. I stood in the quiet. I wasn't scared, not exactly. But I knew how dangerous powerless people became when you stood in the way of the one thing they were clinging to. That night, it began. My trash bins disappeared. The next morning, a smear of raw egg trailed down the passenger side of my truck. 3 days later, I found a dead squirrel stuffed in my mailbox. Petty, cowardly, juvenile, but designed for one thing: pressure. They were trying to wear me down, break my sense of peace, make me question whether standing firm was worth it. But I knew their game, and I had more than thick walls and storm anchors to protect me. I had records. I had a small safe tucked in my closet that contained every HOA fine I'd ever paid, every letter they sent, every permit they challenged, every variance denial, and I had copies of their own mistakes, like the letter from the city's planning department denying their request to bypass load-bearing upgrades when they renovated the clubhouse roof in 2018. They hadn't reinforced it. That's why it fell. They blamed the storm. But the storm only finished what negligence started. The next week, I sent a certified letter of my own to the HOA board and a copy to the city attorney. It read, "To whom it may concern, I, William Sanderson, a homeowner at 122 Juniper Lane, refused to participate in the proposed HOA-wide insurance claim as I suffered no damage to my property. Furthermore, I believe portions of the claim are knowingly fraudulent, and I possess documentation to support that assertion. I request the city to audit the HOA's construction permits, contractor records, and insurance filings related to the clubhouse renovations completed in 2018. Failure to investigate these matters may result in my referring this to the State Department of Insurance and, if necessary, the Attorney General's office. Respectfully, William Sanderson." I sent it, then I waited. The silence from the HOA was deafening for 2 days. Then came the retaliation. The next board meeting was broadcast virtually. Given that the clubhouse was still unusable, I logged in anonymously just to observe. I shouldn't have been surprised when Bryce brought me up by name again. There are residents attempting to sabotage the recovery process. People who think their self-interest outweighs our collective suffering. Mr. Sanderson has not only refused to cooperate, but he's contacted outside authorities with baseless allegations. Danielle chimed in. This kind of behavior is divisive and dangerous. If we lose this claim, it could mean years of delayed rebuilding for everyone. Then came the kicker. Bryce said, "We're also reviewing whether Mr. Sanderson's home construction violated HOA architectural harmony. We may be forced to issue retroactive design penalties. They were going to fine me for my house surviving, for doing what they didn't have the foresight or backbone to do themselves." I ended the call before the meeting adjourned. Let them try. Because I was just getting started, I knew who the HOA used as their preferred construction vendor. Calder & Sons. A shady LLC with a long trail of complaints and safety violations. I knew the city had opened an investigation into them years back that mysteriously went nowhere. It was time someone blew it wide open. The letter they slipped under my door. Didn't even try to hide its intent. Dear Mr. Sanderson, due to your continued refusal to join the Haven Glen Unified Settlement claim and the undue strain your dissent has placed on community morale, the HOA board has voted to impose a temporary special assessment fee of $8,724.60 to cover administrative and legal delays directly resulting from your lack of cooperation. No justification, no pretense, just a number, one they seem to pull out of thin air, and the clear message that if you don't pay, you're the problem. It was blackmail dressed as bureaucracy, and the worst part wasn't the fee, it was what came next. The neighborhood began to turn. One by one, people I'd once helped, cleared gutters for, jump-started cars, pulled fence panels back into place and began ignoring me. No more waves, no more nods, just silence. Then whispers. At the corner of Sycamore and Elm, I overheard two women talking as I passed with my dog. One of them, Trina, lowered her voice just enough to be cruel. He's the reason our claim's delayed, you know that, right? I heard the insurance company might walk. The other gasped. He's the only one who didn't suffer damage. How's that fair? Fair as if surviving the storm was some kind of betrayal. By the end of that week, 4 more residents received second-round damage inspections required by the insurance carrier. According to the HOA, all 4 were people I had spoken with after the storm. People who told me privately they doubted the $10 million claim. Now they were under scrutiny. That wasn't coincidence. That was strategy. The HOA wasn't just pressuring me. They were using me as an example. I went to the post office in person just to make sure nothing else was being intercepted. The clerk, Raoul, who'd always been friendly, pulled me aside. They filed a mail complaint on your box, he said quietly. Claimed you were tampering with other people's deliveries. My stomach dropped. What? He looked embarrassed. I didn't believe it, but I had to file a report. It's flagged now, just be careful. They were closing in legally, socially, even federally, and all I'd done was refuse to commit fraud. That night, I went through my records again. I had everything. The rejection letters, the contractor complaints, the meeting minutes they didn't think anyone would keep. And then I remembered something. Project West 21, the drainage overhaul, the one Bryce rushed, the one Calder & Sons cut corners on. Those were the homes that collapsed first. This wasn't just fraud. This was liability. Real, actionable criminal liability. The next morning, a knock came at my door. It was Darren Pike from 3 blocks over, holding a folded document. They're threatening to fine me too, he said. If I don't sign, they'll mark me as non-contributing. That's not a thing, I said. He nodded slowly. I know. Now. Over the next 2 days, 4 more neighbors came, quietly, carefully, afraid. I wasn't just being watched anymore. I was being followed. Then, Saturday, another knock, hard, angry. I opened the door. Bryce stood there, jaw tight, eyes bloodshot. You really think you're going to win this? He snapped. You think dragging everyone down with you is some noble stand? I'm not dragging anyone, I said. I'm just not lying. His voice cracked. If this claim falls apart, we're all on the hook. You did this, I said. You pushed shoddy. Projects used banned contractors ignored. Violations, and now you want me to help cover it up. He froze, then pointed a shaking finger at me. You're going to regret this. He left. Locked the door. Behind it, I whispered, so will you. It started with a single light bulb. Smashed on my porch, I swept it up. The next night, another, then both. Fixtures. They wanted me in the dark. I installed motion LEDs. I added a second IR camera. I didn't tell the HOA. Knew they already knew. That week, I stopped opening packages. Every box that showed up, even from places I recognized, I photographed before touching. 2 came with no return label. 1 had been partially opened and retaped. Filed a report with the local police department. Not because I thought they'd do much. This was still a petty civil dispute in their eyes, but I wanted a record the next morning. A letter appeared taped to my door, typed, no signature, one sentence: you think you're safe behind walls. But everyone has to step outside eventually. That's when the dream started again. Not about the HOA, about the field hospitals, the ones I saw overseas, the shattered bodies we pulled from collapsed barracks, the wailing wind of desert storms that buried everything without mercy. Trauma is funny like that. It doesn't wait for context. It just comes. And now it came in the quiet of my suburban kitchen, while I sat alone with a cooling cup of coffee and a camera feed looped on my laptop screen. They weren't just trying to intimidate me. They wanted me unstable, angry, irrational, so they could point to me and say, see, he's unfit, he's dangerous. But they underestimated how many nights I've stayed awake on watch, how many years I've survived knowing a real enemy waits in silence, not always with weapons, but with paperwork and fear. That week I got a visit I wasn't expecting. Her name was Elise, mid-40s, strong posture, city inspector's badge on her hip. She showed up unannounced, walking up my path in plain khakis and a clipboard. "Mr. Sanderson?" she asked. I nodded. "I'm here in response to a complaint filed by the Haven Glen HOA. They're alleging unpermitted structural modifications, potentially in violation of county code. Do you mind if I take a look around?" I laughed. A bitter one. "They want you to find something wrong with the only house that didn't fall." She didn't smile. "They're pushing this hard. Filed a 17-page complaint. That doesn't happen often. You've pissed someone off." I stepped aside. "Be my guest." She walked the perimeter, checked the anchors, studied the drainage slopes, photographed the foundation, took notes, but I saw it in her face. Nothing was wrong. Everything had been done by the book. Documentation, permits, engineer stamps, compliant materials. She stopped before leaving. "Between you and me, this house is textbook safe. The board's fishing, I've seen it before. Retaliation." She nodded once. "They can't make the storm unhappen, so they're trying to make your survival look like a crime." She handed me her card. "If they push again, tell them the inspector found 0 violations. I'll write it up officially." As she left, I exhaled for the first time in what felt like days, but the relief didn't last. That weekend, my property line markers disappeared. I had installed them after the original survey, a legal precaution. Now 3 of them had been uprooted, leaning like corpses along the edge of my backyard. The 4th was gone entirely. I didn't even bother calling the HOA. I filed a police report. Then I pulled out my drone and flew it high and wide. "We've frozen the disbursement on Haven Glen's group claim," the agent told me. "There are red flags across multiple affidavits and some serious questions about how that 10 million figure was calculated." I didn't smile. I didn't need to. The dominoes had started falling, but not everyone was happy. A brick was thrown through my garage window 2 nights later. I was home. The sound was deafening. I hit the floodlights, grabbed my flashlight, and ran out the side door. They were gone before I got there, but not before my cameras caught them. A figure in a hood, medium height, unmistakably Bryce's son. I filed a police report again, attached the video. I didn't press charges. Not yet, because that wasn't the war I was fighting. The real battle was coming. A week later, the city called a public hearing, officially. It was a community oversight review, but we all knew it was an inquisition. And when they posted the announcement, they used a word the HOA had been terrified of for months: fraud. The hearing would be open, the public was invited, the board was subpoenaed, and I was on the witness list. I arrived at City Hall in a pressed shirt, folder in hand, every page of evidence sorted and labeled. Bryce was already there, hunched over, surrounded by lawyers. Danielle didn't even make eye contact. As I walked into the chamber, people whispered. Some looked away, but others nodded. Small, barely their gestures. Maybe just acknowledgement, maybe something more. By the time I took my seat, I knew this wasn't just about me anymore. This was about all the people they'd silenced, and finally, someone was listening. The chamber was full by the time the clerk called my name. It was quiet, not courtroom quiet, but something more charged, the kind of quiet that hums in your bones. People I hadn't seen since before the hurricane were crammed, shoulder to shoulder in rows of plastic chairs. Some still wore storm-worn clothes. Some came in work uniforms, a few had notebooks. In their laps, most just watched, tense, curious, some hostile. Bryce sat on the left side of the chamber, flanked by 2 attorneys and a city representative. Danielle sat beside him, her arms crossed, lips pressed so tight they'd turned white. The rest of the board had scattered. Some had sent statements, others just ghosted. I didn't need them. I had the truth. When I walked to the microphone, I didn't bring theatrics, no booming speeches, just my folder, a stack of exhibits, and a memory that didn't need a script. "State your name for the record," the chair asked. "William Sanderson," I said. "Retired military engineer. Homeowner, 122 Juniper Lane. You may proceed." I opened the folder, placed the first page under the document cam, and took a breath. This is an internal HOA meeting transcript recorded July of this year, roughly 2 months before the hurricane. In it, the board discusses ignoring safety recommendations and proceeding with a solar panel installation on the clubhouse roof. The job was approved despite a permit denial from the city and carried out by Calderon Sons, a vendor with at least 6 unresolved contractor violations. In the state registry, there was a shift in the room. Ripple people sat forward. Tap the screen. This memo from Calder's subcontracted structural engineer warned explicitly against adding weight to the aging trusses. He wrote, "Do not build. Failure likely in high wind or seismic event." I paused. Let that land. And yet they built anyway. Fast, cheap, quiet. I moved to the next document. When the hurricane struck, the clubhouse roof collapsed first. You've all seen the photos. But that collapse wasn't just from wind. It was negligence. It was failure layered on fraud. Another page. This is the insurance affidavit, submitted by the HOA on behalf of all homeowners. Note the claim amount. No independent audits, no adjuster reports, just a blanket, demand based on unverified losses. Looked at the room, at neighbors, at officials, at the hollow eyes of people who'd lost everything. They tried to make me sign it, even though my home suffered no damage. When I refused, they fined me, threatened me, harassed me, and when that didn't work, I pulled out a printed still from my security camera feed. They sent people to my door, including a minor who unknowingly delivered this. I clicked play, a 10-second clip. Just enough to hear Bryce's voice say on the boardroom recording, "We bury it." The paper trail stops with Danielle. The storm took it down. End of story. Gasps broke the silence. One man shouted, "Are you kidding me?" Another clutched her chest. The committee chair raised her hand. "Please, order." Bryce was turning red. His lawyer whispered something, but he waved it off. "He's misrepresenting," Bryce barked. "That video was illegally obtained. It's inadmissible." The city attorney leaned into his mic. That recording was voluntarily provided by a resident acting independently. Mr. Sanderson had no role in its creation, and given the compelling public interest and evidence of potential fraud, we find it entirely relevant. Bryce's mouth opened, but nothing came out. I finished calmly. For years, this board has enforced cosmetic rules, fence color, flower bed symmetry, while ignoring structural risks, misusing funds, and bullying anyone who doesn't fall in line. The hurricane didn't destroy Haven Glen. It exposed it. The room broke into murmurs. Angry, rattled, electric. I'm not here to punish, I'm here to protect. Not just my property, but the right of every homeowner to live without being coerced, defrauded, or silenced. I sat down. Next came the city inspector, then the insurance fraud analyst. Then, shockingly, 3 residents I hadn't spoken to in weeks stood up uninvited and added their stories. Fines without cause. Secret. Late-night board meetings. Projects. Approved with zero oversight, and then Elise, the inspector, who had walked my property and presented her findings. Mr. Sanderson's property is the only one to pass full FEMA grade reinforcement standards. He wasn't just lucky, he was prepared. The Board penalized him for that preparation. And then they tried to use his success to justify their lies. That was the moment everything shifted. The chairwoman raised her gavel. This board finds sufficient grounds to recommend immediate suspension of Haven Glen, HOA's operating authority pending a full audit referral of evidence to the county district attorney, and appointment of a third-party administrator. The gavel fell. Power changed hands. Bryce stood and stormed out. Danielle stayed seated, eyes glassy. I stayed in my chair. People came up. Some thanked me. Others just gave that quiet look. I see you now. One man placed a hand on my shoulder. I wish I'd stood up sooner. Me too, I said. Outside, the wind was picking up again, not dangerous, just enough to rustle the trees. A reminder. Nature doesn't wait for permission. For the first time since the storm, something steady bloomed inside me. Peace. But I knew it wasn't over. There was still a community to rebuild, and trust to reclaim. And I wasn't going anywhere.